What if the reason your life hasn't changed isn't because you're unlucky, but because you've been operating at a level that can only produce average results? And deep down, you already know it. You wake up with plans, big ones. You tell yourself, today I'll be different, more focused, more disciplined, more serious. But then the day happens. Distractions, delays, excuses that sound reasonable in the moment. And somehow, by the end of the day, you've negotiated your dreams down to comfort again. Now here's the uncomfortable part. You don't have a dream problem, you have a discipline problem. And that's not an insult, that's a wake-up call. Because discipline isn't about being extreme. It's about being consistent when nobody's watching. But this is where it gets real. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they keep choosing what's easy over what actually moves their life forward. Think about it for a second. How many times have you said, "I'll start tomorrow," and tomorrow quietly turned into next week, then next month, then someday? Be honest. Does this feel familiar? Because if it does, you're not alone. But you are at a crossroads, and that's when it hits you. You've been treating your goals like options, not obligations. You show up when you feel like it. You quit when it gets uncomfortable. You lower the standard, just enough to feel okay again. And your life responds exactly how it should, with average results. But here's the part nobody tells you. Average effort isn't neutral, it's destructive. Because it slowly trains your mind to accept less than what you're capable of. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle. Skipping one workout, postponing one task. Choosing comfort. Just this once. But those just this once moments, they stack. And before you know it, you're living a life that feels smaller than what you imagined. Not because you couldn't do more, but because you didn't demand more from yourself. Now here's the shift. What if discipline isn't something you need to force, but something you need to understand? Wait till you hear this. Discipline isn't about motivation. In fact, it has nothing to do with how you feel. Because if you rely on motivation, you'll only show up on the days it's convenient, and convenience never built anything extraordinary. So the real question becomes, who are you when you don't feel like it? When it's boring? When it's hard? When nobody would blame you for stopping? That's where your real identity lives. And most people avoid that version of themselves because it's uncomfortable. But this next part changes everything. Discipline is simply the ability to keep a promise to yourself. That's it. Not a big concept, not complicated. Just a quiet decision, repeated daily. But here's where people get stuck. They think discipline means becoming someone completely different overnight. More focused, more driven, more perfect. But that's a trap. Because when you aim for perfection, you burn out. And when you burn out, you quit. So instead, the real game is smaller than you think. It's showing up. Even when it's messy, it's doing the work. Even when it's not perfect, it's choosing progress over comfort. And yeah, it sounds simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. Because your brain is wired for comfort. It wants safety, predictability, less effort. So every time you try to level up, it pushes back with thoughts like, "This is too much. I'll do it later. I deserve a break." And here's the dangerous part. Those thoughts feel true, but they're not. They're just familiar, and familiarity keeps you stuck. So why does this keep happening? Why do you know what to do, but still don't do it? We'll get to that. But first, understand this. Your current results are not random. They are a direct reflection of your daily standards, not your intentions, not your goals. Your standards, and if your standards are flexible, your life will be too, in the worst way. Now here's a quiet challenge. If this makes sense, say something. Not for anyone else, just to acknowledge it to yourself. Because awareness is where everything starts, and once you see it, You can't unsee it. So now you have a choice. Stay where it's comfortable, or step into something that actually demands more from you, and that's where the real journey begins. So now you're standing at that invisible line. On one side, the version of you that keeps repeating the same patterns. On the other, the version that finally decides enough is enough. And here's the strange part. Nothing around you changes when you cross that line. Same room, same phone, same life. But something inside you shifts. And that shift, it's subtle. You stop asking, "Do I feel like it?" And you start asking, "Is this aligned with who I said I'd become?" That question alone changes everything. Because now, it's not about mood anymore, it's about identity. But this is where most people hesitate, because stepping into a new identity feels fake at first. You start acting disciplined, but your mind whispers, "This isn't really you." You try to be consistent, but your old habits keep pulling you back, and that's when doubt creeps in. What if I can't keep this up? What if I fail again? Let me tell you something most people won't admit. Everyone feels that. Even the people you think are naturally disciplined. They just learned one thing you haven't fully accepted yet. Discipline is built, not born. And that means you're allowed to struggle with it. You're allowed to feel resistance. You're allowed to mess up. The only thing you're not allowed to do is pretend it doesn't matter. Because it does. More than you think. Now here's the part nobody prepares you for. The moment you decide to level up. Your environment will test you. Your phone will feel more addictive. Your bed will feel more comfortable. Your excuses will sound more convincing than ever. It's almost like life is asking, "Are you serious this time?" And most people fail that test. Not because they're weak, but because they underestimated how strong their old habits are. Think about it. You've been practicing inconsistency for years. Of course it's going to feel natural. Of course discipline feels unnatural at first. That's not a sign. You're doing it wrong. That's proof. You're finally doing something different. Be honest. When things get uncomfortable, do you push through or pull back? Because that answer, it's shaping your future in real time. And this is where things change again. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer negotiations. Every time you say, "I'll do it later," you're negotiating with your future, and your future keeps losing those deals. So here's a simple shift. Stop debating. Start deciding. Decide once, and follow through. No overthinking, no emotional discussions in your head. Just action. Because action silences doubt faster than anything else. But wait, there's a catch. At first, it won't feel rewarding. You'll wake up early and still feel tired. You'll do the work and still not see results. You'll stay consistent and still feel behind. And that's where most people quit, because they expect immediate proof. But discipline doesn't work like that. It compounds, quietly, slowly. Until one day, it's undeniable. But you have to stay long enough to see it. And that requires something deeper than motivation. It requires trust. Trust that your effort is building something, even when you can't see it yet. That's hard, really hard. Because we're used to instant feedback, likes, messages, quick wins. Discipline doesn't give you that. It gives you delayed results. And delayed results test your patience. So the real question becomes, can you keep going without immediate validation? Think about that for a second, because that's the difference between average and extraordinary. Average people need proof to continue. Extraordinary people continue until proof shows up. And here's a truth that might hit a little deep. You don't lack potential. You lack consistency under pressure. But the moment you fix that, everything changes. Your confidence, your focus, your entire trajectory. Not overnight, but inevitably. And this next part matters more than you think. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be reliable. reliable to your own standards, reliable to your own goals, reliable when it actually counts. Because at the end of the day, success isn't about doing something once. It's about doing the right things over and over again, even when it's boring, even when it's hard, even when nobody notices. So here's something to sit with. What if your breakthrough isn't missing? What if it's just waiting on the other side of consistency? Don't answer that too quickly. Let it sink in, because the next step you take will either prove that true or delay it again. And now, we need to talk about the one thing that silently destroys discipline before it even has a chance. And that one thing? Comfort. Not obvious comfort, not the kind you notice right away. The quiet kind, the kind that convinces you, this is fine, because comfort doesn't feel dangerous. It feels safe, familiar, earned. But here's the truth. Most people avoid. Comfort is the biggest reason your life hasn't changed, not lack of knowledge, not lack of opportunity. Comfort, because every time life asks you to grow, it also asks you to leave something behind. Old habits, old routines, old versions of yourself. And that's uncomfortable. So what do most people do? They hesitate, they delay, they tell themselves, I'll change when I'm ready. But readiness? It's a myth. You don't feel ready. Then act. You act, and then you become ready. That's how it actually works. But this is where it gets real. Comfort doesn't just slow you down. It lies to you. It tells you, you've done enough today. You deserve a break. You can skip this just once. And those lies, they sound reasonable. That's what makes them dangerous. Because you don't feel like you're sabotaging yourself. You feel like you're being fair to yourself. But slowly, quietly, those small decisions lower your standard. And once your standard drops, everything else follows. Your effort, your focus, your results. Now here's a question most people don't ask themselves. What is your actual standard? Not what you say it is, not what you want it to be, what you consistently do. Because that's the truth. If your standard is inconsistent effort, you'll get inconsistent results. If your standard is comfort, you'll get a comfortable life. And let's be honest, a comfortable life isn't a bad thing until it starts feeling like a cage, until you realize you could have done more, been more, lived more. That's when comfort becomes regret. And regret? That's a different kind of pain. Quiet, heavy, permanent. So now the question changes again. Do you want comfort now or pride later? Because you don't get both. And yeah, that's harsh. But it's honest. And honesty is what actually moves you forward. Now here's where everything flips. Discipline isn't about restricting your life. It's about expanding it. Because every time you choose discipline, you're buying back control. Control over your time, your energy, your future. But every time you choose comfort, you're giving that control away. Slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you look around and realize you're not in control anymore. Your habits are, your distractions are, your excuses are. And breaking out of that, it's not easy. But it's simple. You raise your standard, not dramatically, not perfectly, just intentionally. You decide, this is what I do now, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when nobody's watching. Because that's the real test, not when it's easy, but when it's not. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something hard? Just because you said you would, not because you had to, not because someone expected you to, but because you decided. If you can't remember, that's the signal. Not a failure, a signal that something needs to change. And this next part changes everything. You don't build discipline by doing more. You build it by doing what you said you would do. That's it. Small promises, kept consistently. That's how trust builds. And not just trust with others, trust with yourself. Because right now, that trust might be broken. You say you'll do something, and then you don't. You plan, but don't follow through. You start, but don't finish. And every time that happens, your confidence drops. Not loudly, but quietly, until you stop believing in your own words. That's dangerous, because if you don't trust yourself, nothing else works. So the real goal? Rebuild that trust. One action at a time. One decision at a time. No shortcuts, no hacks, just consistency. And yeah, it's slow, but it's real. And real change takes time. Now here's the final shift before everything comes together. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And you start asking, what would the disciplined version of me do right now? And then you do that. Not perfectly, just honestly. Because that version of you, it already exists. You're just choosing whether to step into it or not. And once you start choosing it consistently, your entire life begins to move in a different direction. Not overnight, but permanently. And that's where everything finally clicks. And when it finally clicks, it doesn't feel loud. There's no dramatic moment, no sudden breakthrough where everything changes overnight. It's quieter than that. You just stop negotiating. You wake up and do what needs to be done, not because you're excited, not because you're motivated, but because that's who you are now. And that's the shift most people miss. They think discipline is something you do. But it's not. It's someone you become. And once you become that person, everything else follows. But here's the part nobody tells you. Haha. Even after the shift, it doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. The resistance is still there. The distractions don't disappear. The excuses still show up. But they stop controlling you, because now you see them for what they are. Just thoughts, not commands. And that awareness, it gives you power. The power to choose differently, again and again and again, until those choices become automatic. And suddenly, the things that used to feel hard start to feel normal. Waking up early, doing the work. Staying focused, not because they're easy, but because they're expected from yourself. Now think about that for a second. What happens when your normal is disciplined effort? Your results change, your confidence grows, your life expands, not because of luck, not because of talent, but because your standards finally matched your ambitions. And this is where it gets interesting. You start noticing things you didn't before. How often people quit too early, how easily they get distracted, how quickly they settle. Not judging them, just seeing the pattern, because you used to be there too. And that awareness, it keeps you grounded. It reminds you, this isn't about being better than anyone else. It's about being better than who you used to be. Quietly, consistently. Now here's a question most people avoid. What would your life look like if you actually followed through on everything you said you'd do? Not perfectly, but consistently. Take a second, really picture it. The version of you who shows up every day, who finishes what they start, who doesn't make excuses. That version of you, it's not unrealistic. It's just underdeveloped. And the only thing holding it back is the gap between what you know and what you actually do. That gap, that's where your life is being decided every single day. And closing that gap isn't about learning more. It's about executing more, because you already know enough. You know what matters. You know what doesn't. You know what you should be doing. So the real question is, why aren't you doing it? Don't answer that out loud. Just be honest with yourself. Because whatever that answer is, that's where your work begins. And here's the good news. You don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to start. One decision, one action, one promise, kept. Then repeat. That's it. No complexity, no overthinking, just execution. Because at the end of the day, discipline isn't about intensity. It's about reliability. Being the person who does what they said they would do, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when nobody's watching. And if you can become that person, your life will change, not in a flashy way, but in a real, undeniable way. Opportunities will open up, confidence will build, momentum will take over, and the life you once thought was out of reach becomes your reality. Step by step, choice by choice. Now here's the final thought. You don't need a new goal. You don't need a new plan. You need a new standard. A standard that doesn't bend when things get hard. A standard that doesn't depend on how you feel. A standard that quietly says, "This is who I am now." And once that standard is set, everything else aligns. So if this hit you, even a little, don't just move on. Don't just nod your head and forget it tomorrow. Because that's what average effort does. It understands, but doesn't act. And you already know where that leads. Instead, start small. Start today. Start now. And prove to yourself that you're capable of more, because you are. You always were. You just needed to raise the standard. If this stayed with you, keep going and start choosing a life that actually reflects what you're capable of.